Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Dragons and Dice. Today we're going to be going over one of my favorite subjects, and that is how I go about building my worlds to host my campaigns in. So if you've ever been a little daunted on how to get started on building a whole world to put all those great quest ideas you have, stay tuned. Welcome to Dragons and Dice. So it's time to play some D&D. And to be able to do that, you need someone that's going to be able to run that game for you, and you're also going to need a world for that game to take place in. And if you're using a module, that'll be pretty much contained in the book that comes with it. If you're doing a unique and custom setting that's all homebrewed, then you're going to have someone to build that entire world, and that's what this episode is going to be about. So when I'm starting a new campaign, the first thing I like to figure out is how I'm going to have it set up. Is it going to be like a full open sandbox and the players can just run amok in the world with no restraints and no rails? Or is it going to be a little bit more linear and I'm going to be able to kind of keep them moving forward in a general direction with kind of like bumper lanes on a bowling alley? And that's important to decide because that really dictates how much work you have to do before the campaign starts. And I will say, I normally shy away from doing a full open sandbox because when you give players the option of exploring a whole world, that's what they're playing the game for, is to go and see what all's out there and what all they can get away with and what they can do. And so you have to have so much stuff prepared, or you have to be really comfortable with just doing it all off the cuff, which is a good skill for all DMs to have because it's always going to come up, even if you're kind of keeping people on the rails and headed like down a main storyline. But that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're a younger DM and haven't run a lot of campaigns. I would stick with something that's got a little more control off the start, as it gives you a chance to kind of fill your party out and see how adventurous they're going to be. And one of the ways I like to do this is, even if I'm running a full sandbox campaign, I like to have a starter area where for the first 1 to 5 levels, the group will kind of be locked into the same area and kind of gives you a good feel on what all they're going to do. And that's a good technique for when you're building your campaign settings, to set a little part aside and have that be stowed away just for the start of the campaign, and then let them kind of branch out and explore after that. And then the next thing that I decide on building my campaign before I build my first map or do any of the setting is what the level of technology is going to be, because this is really important. If you end up with airships and stuff that moves faster than horse and buggy, then your maps need to be bigger. Otherwise, everything's very congested and close to each other, and there's no real travel time in the game. Whereas if it's, high fantasy, no, technology level, your worlds can be a little smaller because of the time that it takes to get from place to place. And so that's the next thing I like to figure out before I do a first map of anything. So this brings us to the start of building your world. And there's a couple schools of thought on this. I kind of use a combination of the two. So you can either work big to small, and this gives you a major overview of your world, but it does take a lot of prep work in that you basically have to design the whole world, continent, planet, whatever you're using first, and then work smaller from that. Or the other option is you start off small and work to big. And this works really well if you need time to like build your world, or if you're rushed for prepping stuff and don't have a lot of free time before the campaign starts, because it just gives you a little bit of area that's prepared, and then you expand outward based on what your players are doing. So I like both these. And as I said earlier, one of the things I really enjoy doing is I'll go and do a starter area, and this will be small to big. It'll just be a little mini island or town or whatever you need that just puts the party in it for the first couple levels. And I like doing this for a couple of reasons. The first is it really, as the DM, gives you some time to get a feel for how your table is going to be played, because some groups are, nose to the grindstone, going to barrel through, find all the fights, get all the loot, move to the next area, rinse and repeat, and get as much stuff done as possible. And then some groups are going to explore every town that they come to and talk to every merchant and have like massive amounts of role play. And those are going to go slower. And so using the starter area, it really lets you as the DM get a good feel for how much you need to have prepared for each week. And that's really valuable because if you DM'd a game before, there's sometimes you show up and you're like, I've got all this material, and you get through like the first page of it. And then there's other times you show up and they're just like breakneck speed, killing everything in 2-3 hits. And you're like, oh man, I'm going to have to make all this up on the fly. I like using the starter area because it gives you a good timing to get a good feel for your party, and it lets the party meld together. And, that's a good start for the rest of the whole campaign. So that's how I like to start. But if I had to pick between working big to small or small to big, I like to work big to small. The first thing I try to do is design what my continent's going to be, or planet, or however you want to go about it. I like using the Discworld idea for D&D worlds. It works really conveniently, as in everything's layered on top of each other. Your, material plane, Underdark, Feywild, Shadowfell, all that just being in tiers. And you basically end up with Australia-like continents. And I like to design that whole area first. And so here's the way I build my worlds. I do a planet, continent, whichever you want to do. And then I do my major settlements next. And then the third thing I build is major landmarks. If there's going to be mountain ranges, caves, anything like that. Then I go to minor settlements and minor landmarks, where those rivers were. Now those creeks break off from it. There's little towns in between the big towns. And this will give you a really natural progression for how you want your world laid out. And this is kind of where the level of technology that you picked at the start dictates how spread out you want all that stuff to be. And after you get all this built, I just add roads and trails in for the party to travel along, or, they'll venture off the beaten path, as you say. And this seems to work really well for me. It feels easier for me to run a campaign if I know what the whole world looks like and I'm not having to try to build it each week. But like I said, that does take a decent chunk of work getting started to map all this stuff out. And I like to use Incarnate is where I build my maps online. It works really well for you being able to build whole bodies and land and then just work smaller as you go. But you don't have to do anything that complex. You can have hand-drawn continents and, roads between cities, and X marks, this orc village, and, square marks that human village. It can be as complicated or as simple as you like. The point is, if you're going to work big to small, when you build all of these things, you need to make sure that you don't build it entirely. You have to leave some room. And I think that's important whether you're working big to small or small to big, because you have to have space to fit things in that come up as your campaign progresses. Having the space to fit things in is really handy for a couple of reasons. If you got space to add in an extra town, a dungeon, a landmark, etc., it lets you give the party more stuff to do if things are progressing too quickly or too slowly for however you want it to go. And you can give them more loot by they find this cave, or they can be a lore drop as they come across an ancient temple and find out things. It gives you a chance to kind of build it as you're going, even though you kind of have the whole layout done beforehand. This also can be one of your best friends as a DM, because if you have people traveling to an area that you're not prepped for, if it's not just touching and everything is, step from A to B to B to C, you can have some randomness come in. And if you have everything already packed in your campaign and no room for flexibility, you can't do that. So this kind of gives you the option to branch out as a DM also, and do stuff on the fly that comes up as a way of slowing the party down from getting to an area, or adding in something that you maybe forgot to give them earlier or that they'll need going forward. And just having room to expand, I think, it's the name of the game in D&D. You have to be able to adjust and improvise on the fly, and that's just part of what DMing is. And I think it's one of the real joys of D&D is the randomness of it all, because no matter how much you plan, when the players get there and start rolling dice, all kinds of weird stuff always happens. The other advantage, I think, from working big to small and having your whole world pre-made before you start the campaign, as the DM, it lets you set up nice encounters based on landscape and area where the party can meet the BBEG for the first time, or if you have a catastrophic event that's going to happen, like you know that there's going to be this ocean town get wiped out by a tidal wave. Anything like that, if you already have that area built, it kind of gives you your pacing for how soon you want that to happen with the party getting there. And then another thing that I really like to do is I like to work from the main boss fight back for my campaign in the way I build it. And I think that just gives me a good idea of how I want to structure the campaign. And if I know what I want the main fight to be at the end of the whole ordeal, it lets me have lore and hints and give the party, help, and they'll know what kind of items they need. And it helps me as a DM to make sure that all those things are laid out through the campaign. And I like to know where that fight's going to take place, what the environmental effects are going to be. And by having the whole world built, I'm not having to like rush and fit that in, or, oh, there's a town over here. And oh man, how it goes when you're trying to do stuff on the fly, you can step on your own toes a lot. Having the whole world built and knowing where the final battle takes place is a really good technique for being able to keep everything concise and headed in the same direction. And it keeps you from having to like, retcon everything because, I forgot this was supposed to happen here, or this was supposed to happen here before you get to the main boss fight. You already know what's going to be the main boss fight. And that gives you a good chunk of control over getting the party into that place. So to summarize how I like to work from big to small is I pick out if it's going to be sandbox or linear, and then I decide what the technology level is going to be for the whole world. And then after that, I like to do my whole continent and then do settlements, big landmarks, little settlements, little landmarks, and then build a starting area where the party will be meeting to kick off the campaign. And the other thing I like to do from big to small is I work the campaign the same way back. I want the main quest. I want to know where the end of it's going to be and work back from there to the start. And I feel like this is a good template for building a campaign if you have the time to do a bunch of it beforehand. Now it's time for the homebrewed item of the week. Since this episode's mostly for the DMs, this homebrewed item is more of a template for adding curses to an item that you can surprise your players with as the DM. And so the way this curse item works is it doesn't show up as cursed when they roll to identify the item. It only shows up once they roll a 1 and then the curse activates. So when that PC drops that crit neg, the DM then gets to roll on a 1 through D8 chart. And the first one is that character will fall asleep for 1d4 turns. The second effect is that PC can only take one action, bonus action, reaction, or movement. They have to pick. They can't do all of them. If they roll a 3, they autofill checks and saves for the remainder of the day. If they roll a 4, their armor class is reduced by 2 for the remainder of the day. If they roll a 5, healing, including hit dice, only heal them for half as much as normal. If they roll a 6, spells cost double and attacks do also. And the way this works is if you cast a fireball at level 3, it costs you 2 level 3 slots now. And if you're a fighter with 3 attacks, it rounds down and you can only do 1. So if you had 4 attacks, you'd be able to do 2. And then if you roll a 7, your species and racial abilities no longer happen for you, so you can't use those. And if you roll an 8, that player gets to use no abilities that require resources. So no second wind for fighters, no spell slots for casters. That last one's really brutal, and that lasts for a day or until someone can remove the curse from them. This is a fun template, and it can be applied to any magical item in the game, and it's a fun, sneaky way to kind of pull one over on your players. Add one to your game. I'm sure they'll hate you for it. So the other way to go about building your campaign setting is to start off small and then expand out from there until you have your whole world built. And this is a really good way if you have limited time before the campaign starts, as in all you really have to do is prepare enough area that the party could get to or be able to know about each session. And that gives you a real amount of flexibility too, because now you don't have too much stuff built. And if something comes up or you want to add in something different or a new player joins the group or whatever happens, nothing's really set in stone yet because you're just kind of exploring it as you go. And this will kind of harken back to the starter area that I talked about liking to do. And that's why I say I kind of like to use both of these, because starting small, you can start your campaign in an island and say you put a little village, one town, a couple dungeons, a few, little temples. You don't have to build a very big area or map, and you can give yourself enough space for your PCs to get to like level, 3 to 5 and really get a feel for everything. And it doesn't take a whole lot of prep work for you because you don't have to have the whole continent built. All you have to have is that little starter area. And then as they expand out and you can decide where the party's going next based off of how the gameplays went. And then you can build your next town and the next area after that. And it kind of is a very linear building of the world because you're just doing it each week based off of the stuff you have. And I assume if you're going to use this technique, I would definitely suggest working at least 2-3 weeks ahead, because there will all be that session when they, get through it all super fast and you're like, oh no. But keep that in mind as you do this. If you work from little to big, just 2 weeks ahead and you'll be great. And it lets you have that starter area that kind of we talked about earlier, where you get to have the party meld together and give you time to keep working on the campaign. The other main advantage that I see in working from small to big is where we were talking about room and leaving expansion space. You still have to do that to some extent, but now if you have a party member who breaks the law and goes to jail, the next week you can have a prison break built as part of your campaign setting. Or however, it gives you real flexibility in being able to customize to exactly what's happening with the group. And if you have the time to do that each week, it gives you great flexibility, and it'll make your campaigns seem very customized to what each of your players are. And I appreciate that. That's just not the way I normally work. Like I said, I like to kind of have it all laid out for me ahead of time, but I can see the advantages in both ways. And I would say if I was ever going to run a true, just wide open sandbox, anything goes, I would probably go small to big just to make sure that, I wasn't doing a bunch of stuff and a lot of work that would never be found, because there's a good chance if you develop a whole world that you're in a sandbox, they're not going to get to all of it. They'll be going their own direction. And so for that type of campaign, I probably would use a small to big build. So in summarizing the small to big, it's pretty much you just need to get a good starter area built and then react to what your players are doing and kind of have a general idea of where, the whole campaign is going to go. Like if you're fighting dragons and it's going to be on top of a mountain, but you start them off on an island, they're going to have to find a way to the island somehow. Keep that in mind, but you don't have to have it all mapped out to a T. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility. And that's kind of the joy of that type of campaign if you want to run one as a DM. And if you like to do stuff off the cuff, these would be great for you because you get to make up a lot of stuff because you won't have nearly as much stuff prepared, and it really makes you very flexible. And there's value in both of those ways. Well, folks, that's it for this episode of Dragons and Dice. Thanks for tuning in and spending your time listening to me go on about my favorite TTRPG, Dungeons and Dragons. And like always, anytime you could leave a review, a follow, or a like wherever you get your podcast, it'd be greatly appreciated as it helps with exposure of a new show. We're also now on Instagram. You can check us out in the link below. And until next time, may your DMs be kind, may your D20s roll high. Bye.